The first time I tried to run a dungeon, it was a disaster. I started playing Dungeons & Dragons back with original Dungeons & Dragons. And I was actually in Europe at the time as in the service. And one of the sergeants, new sergeants in country, had a copy of Dungeons & Dragons, the very original, very first edition of the rules in the brown box. And we played, and I was absolutely hooked. So I ended up on duty, sort of guard duty, to go out, and we were going to Hohenfels, which is for gunnery, and that if you're in the service, it was an old German post that was taken over by the U.S. Army after World War II, and we were going there. I was part of the advance party, and that means we'd set up the tents, and I would just have to watch to make sure nobody stole anything from any of the tents. We had all the cots and everything else that was there, and you had to be concerned about, people appropriating your stuff. So I got sent there. What happened was, just before that, a friend and we wanted to buy the books. We actually ordered the books, but ordering the books takes time, particularly when you're in Europe. And so we gathered all our German coins up and went down. There was a copy machine that took German coins, and we copied the books. Yes, and they were on our copies were on order, and we did that. But I had a partial copy of the books for when I went to Hohenfels. So I started creating my first dungeon, and I remember playing my first dungeon, which was a disaster. Absolutely, positively a disaster. And let me explain why. If you look at the original books, it doesn't really say what to put in a dungeon. It gives some example, and there really wasn't examples. This was before Blackmore was released. So you had no real examples except the one time I'd played, which I loved, but I didn't take real extensive notes about what was in the dungeon. And we were playing along, and so I create my first dungeon, and it's a disaster. Why do I say it was a disaster? Well, it really was, because the original stats said you put monsters in like every 6th room. When you roll a 6, you put a monster, and if there's a treasure, if you roll a 1, and it doesn't say what to put in the rest of the rooms. So I created my first dungeon, and the vast majority of it was empty, which is sort of the kiss of death for a dungeon, because you shouldn't have empty rooms, and I did. I had way too many empty rooms that didn't do anything, and there was nothing interesting in the room, and it just was a disaster. So what I learned from that was that you have to make the rooms interesting. And that was my next dungeon. I really wish I had kept my first dungeon, but I threw it away. I came back, played it once, and it was in total disgust about how awful it played. And then at that point in time, I learned to I start over, learn from your failures, start over, and I started over. And I continued to work on a dungeon. Now I actually have my next dungeon, and that was where someone had recommended that I'd move to millimeter paper, which is what I highly recommend if you're actually drawing dungeons up, is millimeter paper rather than the normal graph paper we see in the United States, because the scale is basically the same. With millimeter paper you get 25.4 feet. If you do 1 millimeter equals 1 foot, for sort of an interesting English scale, you get 25.4 feet to the inch with millimeter paper, and with normal paper where you do five squares to the inch, you get 25 feet to the. So it's basically the same scale for all intents and purposes, and you can do that instead. And so you draw up your dungeon, and it fits nicely onto those to that paper, and you've got all your you can build out all the stuff. Now I'm drawing up some more of the city of Anase, and this reminds me of when I built my first dungeon, and this is one of the things that I am slightly concerned about as I go through and build this. I have the tools are much easier to use. Campaign Cartographer is much easier to use than drawing it out by hand. But the question is, am I going to have time to populate all of this? Because I'm generating a fairly large city. And it's going to be an interesting challenge to populate all of the city and see how it goes doing that. So it will be interesting to see. And oh, that's not exactly what I was expecting. Control Z. What I wanted was here. Yes, that. Okay, so insert. Okay. So, all right. So let's see if I can insert this correctly. And there we go. And that's closer to what we want. Yeah. Learning out how sometimes Campaign Cartographer makes things just a little bit odd to figure out how things work. And it's just, that's fine. So I'm populating out the city, but because it's so large, as you can see, let's zoom back out. This gives me the entire city, and I don't think I'm halfway populated. So I've got this piece up here, then I've got to do this, then I got to break it up into the different zones. You'll have, I don't want to save the Thieves Quarter, because quarter implies a quarter of the city, and what happens is it would be Thieves Town. It's like you have a Chinatown and you have a Little Italy in various large cities, and I've got to figure out this is the port district here, and I'm not sure what this is yet, and working through building out the city reminds me of when I drew my first dungeon, because it was so large. I built a very large dungeon the very first time I drew it out, but it was empty. And that's the thing that's the kiss of death for an adventure, is boring adventures or empty dungeons. I remember reading some of the descriptions of, was it Dwimort or whatever, the one dungeon that was kickstarted and things like that. And the problem with it is that, for all intents and purposes, the dungeon is somewhat empty. And it isn't interesting. And that's the thing that you have to do to make it interesting, is you have to make the dungeon, and in essence in this case the city, I need to make it interesting. And that's going to be the challenging part. I've got lots of ideas and things like that going through that, but I need to do the same thing I've done always, which is okay, so we go click here. So I need to, not only do I need to add all these buildings, I need to figure out who's going to populate them all, and from there, what kind of adventures are going to happen. And that's the thing I'm working on, and a lot of it is spent a lot of time thinking about some of this, and that's the key, is that you've got to make, but you have to make the whatever you create. That's the kiss of death to an adventure is boredom, is where it's not interesting. And that's what I really need to do, is I need to make sure that the adventure has some interesting features that so that people will want to play. Because if it's boring, nobody wants to play. And that was a thing that I learned from my first dungeon, was that you got to make it interesting. And that's sort of a challenge for a lot of people. But my view is, it's always fun to, you can change things around, you can do various things, and don't do like I did. Don't throw things away. Keep them, because if you spend some time and effort, that with a bit more time and effort, you can probably rehabilitate it. I mean, I'm not sure that somebody could create something that was so boring and monotonous, but it would be difficult. In essence, the better solution is to just always create something, keep it, maybe put it back on the back burner, and say, okay, what I built didn't work out, but it's that if something else comes up, then I can repurpose that. I've repurposed dungeons from a variety of different genre. So you find some genre, and you find something else and you can reuse the dungeon in a different way and make it fit to your current environment, so that you've got there. Now this is the thing I'm looking at, is I want to create like back alleys and odd little entrances into things so you've got main streets and side streets, and here in essence I pick up and I move a building down here, and in essence the way to get there is we want a side street. And this is what I think will add some interest to that you're not going down the main streets, but you're going down the back streets. Because let's be honest, most of the characters are going to get involved in something nefarious with that in a city. But in a dungeon, if you're drawing your dungeon, read various adventures and see what they've put in there. They can create rooms which have nothing really to do with the adventure, but they add interest to the game. And that's the key, is you want to be able to add interest to the game to make it interesting to the players. And so if you keep, you just keep massaging things, that's what I'm doing here, is I move things around. I'm to make, to me, aesthetically interesting creations for the city. So I'm just drawing this up, and it's keep your adventures if you're planning to start DMing. The first thing to do is get a notebook and start writing down what your favorite DM is doing. What kind of stories is he telling? How does he engage you? How does he make the adventure interesting? What captures your imagination in the tales that you've been playing, so that you can add those kind of tales to your adventures? So write down, just take a few little notes. Doesn't have to be comprehensive, just some little ideas of notes, and put them down in a notebook so that you can then take those ideas and use them for your own later on. Because you write them down, and my view, yeah, I tend to, I admit, I totally plagiarize. I steal ideas from other people, but they often don't realize, and I try and give credit for that. But you can take an idea, and if you haven't used it in 10 years, and there are times when I have adventures that I have not, that I've written down ideas for, and they set on the in my notebook for 10 years, that basically after 10 years I sort of view them as okay, I may have stolen the idea, but nobody's going to remember that I took it 10 years ago, because I've been gaming for a long time. And that's the key, is if you game for a long time, you can take your ideas and you can keep building them up, keep your ideas going, and you have you can make your ideas no, don't like that kind of road. You can reuse those ideas. So the first time DMing, you may not be successful, and I admit that. You may have it may not have worked out the way you intended, which is a common problem, is that it may not have worked out the plans that you had laid for your adventure fail, and you go, okay, so what? Make it a learning opportunity for you to learn how to make the adventure better the next time. So don't throw away dungeons. I never throw. That's my recommendation. Is I did that and I regret it. But don't throw away dungeons. Keep the dungeon, but figure out how to repurpose it, and do things with your party. Not everything succeeds. You don't have to. The key is, did you have fun? If you have fun, then the adventure is, in my opinion, the adventure was successful. And that's the key, is having fun, thinking of things. And there are plans that I've made, and the party comes up with something weird in the meantime. They make a side comment, and either if I write it down, that's great. If I don't write it down, or if we play it immediately, that's also great. But what happens is that it allows me to quickly write things down, and later on I can steal these ideas and reuse them, and nobody's the wiser, because these ideas, I thought, some players made a suggestion 5 years ago, and nobody will remember. It's a different party. If it's 10 years ago, or in my case, sometimes I've got some stuff that happened 20 years ago. The party I'm playing with, 20 years, we have moved on. Let's just put it that way. We're not in the same geographic locations, and so nobody would remember. And 20 years is a long time. The only reason I remember them is I wrote them down. So what happens is that you can, you have these ideas that you came up with that worked out well for, or maybe they didn't work out well, because if it didn't work out, that's fine too, because you can try it again the next time and see if it works out better this time, because now things have changed. You've got a different group. Something that one group would find boring, another group could be totally interested in, and all you have to do is try it again and see if people like it this time, and you can keep reuse it. You get an idea that you really think it would be cool, but it just never has worked out. Keep trying. You can always try it again and again and again, and make it interesting to the players and to that, and you learn every time. And keep notes. That's the thing that I found was the biggest advantage, was keeping notes of what adventures you've had, so that you can use those ideas again with another party. Because let's be honest, if you're into gaming, you're probably into gaming for a long time. It becomes a lifetime passion, and you like to play. And if once you get the hook on DMing, once you're hooked to doing that, you'll want to do it more and more, and just keep the ideas. See, it's like me populating out the city. There's a lot of work to populate out a city, and it's a lot of work to build a complex dungeon. And keeping integrity between the pieces so that they fit and make sense is really hard, and sometimes it doesn't matter, because if it's fun, who cares? But if it's not fun, then you have to make some changes. But this is the idea that I have, is that I want to make this fun. I want to make a fun city, and the same thing with a dungeon. What worked once with one team, with one group, will probably work again. So keep these ideas, write them down, put them in notes in somewhere. If you're not, you can. I have lab notebooks that I got when I was in college that I have all these ideas for, in building out the adventures, and that's what I fall back on. And some of that I've moved to like OneNote or Evernote or whatever. You can move those and have ideas there, and use the modern technology to advance things, but to remember it. But the real key is you want to be able to have something that you can move on after 5 years, which is, I've been around long enough to know that technology changes, and I don't keep things on 3.5-inch floppies anymore. One point in time I did, but not many people read 3.5-inch floppies. CDs and DVDs, a lot of computers today don't even have CDs and DVDs. So burning it off into media, putting it on a USB drive, that didn't exist 10 years ago, or maybe it did. I don't know how long ago, but I wasn't using them 10 years ago. So you got to keep moving your data from place to place. And that's the other thing that I do. Back it up from one computer to another. You don't want to lose things. And don't be discouraged. The first time I ran it with all these boring rooms, and I was just disgusted with my first time I DM'd. But you learn that you need to put things in to make the rooms interesting. And the second time I DM'd, it was much more not Monty Hall, because I tend not to give a lot of treasure, but there are a lot of things that was circus, shall we say. There was no plan and no methodology for it, but there were truly odd and humorous things, but they were a lot of fun. So later on, I try and become more and more organized, where things fit together in a coherent story. But I do throw oddball topics come up, and you put them in there, and then maybe try to figure out how they fit in with the rest of the stuff. But don't be discouraged if your first time you DM didn't work out. Thank you for listening. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, press the thumbs up button. If you dislike the video, press the thumb down button. I like both. I appreciate the feedback. If you're new here and want to subscribe, press the button on the left, or if you're interested, there should be some links to some other videos on the right. Thank you.